India crowned 4 new unicorns. You know, it's not a country we talk about often.
All right. It is 5:31, so I want to go ahead and get started. First off, welcome. It is really good to see everybody again. Welcome to the Trauma Informed Care Task Force. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. You can raise the small hand function. We are going into dinner time, so feel free to grab a snack if you need one. And keep in mind that we got limited time, but a lot to get through. And this is, once again, the Baltimore City Trauma Informed Care Task Force. I'm Zeke, co-chair with Director Tisha Edwards. Really an honor and a pleasure to be with you all. Just wanted to start with a little bit of really positive news, which is that the Healing Maryland's Trauma Act, which is a bill that was modeled off of the Baltimore City Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, passed through the General Assembly in Annapolis. It was the sine die. It was the last day. There was some ups and some downs and some backs and some forths. But in the end, that bill passed. And so we are moving forward, and we will have a statewide version of a similar task force, as well as making sure all of our state agencies begin to get training in trauma-informed care and begin to really review their policies and procedures with a lens toward reducing re-traumatization. So that's exciting. And it all started with some young people who came to us and said, you know, our city needs to step up and really do better. And we formed this legislation, and we all on this task force are a part of, you know, its inaugural existence. And now it is not only a citywide, but a statewide effort. So everybody should feel real good about that. So with that, I know that we are going to go toward our round the horn, which we're going to do in 4 breakout groups. And so we are just going to go ahead, and Anne is going to bust folks out into the 4 groups, and we will be facilitating rounds questions from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Zeke. I'm just getting a few people who are just getting in assigned. So give me just 30 more seconds. The rounds question, so that you have your requisite 10 seconds to think about it, is we're asking the question tonight, who are the healers in your community and how do they create that healing space? And you're only going to have 30 seconds to answer that. But sharing your name, your pronouns, and then who are the healers in your community and how do they create that healing space? All right, I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Just 1 second. All right, so this is our group here. Excited to have you all in this group, and I will model and go first. So my name is Ann Coy. I'm the Healing City Baltimore coordinator, and I help support the legislation. My pronouns are she, hers. And I'm so excited to hear your answers to this question. My 30-second answer, the healers in my community are the people who know the community. They're the people who are out and are interacting with people and asking how people are doing. And I think that person-to-person interaction is what helps to create healing spaces when people are truly reaching out and caring for one another. So I'm just going to go down the list as you show up for me. And Steve, can I ask you to go next? Oh,
Sorry, did you say Zeke or Steve?
I said Steve.
Yeah. Steve Zinn, I'm the director of the University of Maryland Children's Hospital. My pronouns are he, his, him. The healers in my community, and I'm going to define that as my work community. The healers in my community, I believe, are actually the young, upcoming medical students, physician trainees, residents, and nursing students. They are really a galvanizing force. I'm not saying that people my age are not the healers, but the younger generation has clearly embraced this and are moving the needle forward and taking the lead in helping us gain the trust of the community. Done.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Desiree, if you could go next.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Desiree Dixon. I'm with Bolton Therapy and Wellness. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And the healers in my community, is it okay if I say myself as one of them? Sure. So myself, my colleagues, and the other clinicians who work with me. They really, we are a very specific group focused on helping to heal trauma, and their dedication is unparalleled. Yeah.
You were like right at 30 seconds. Well done. Kevin.
Did I miss the opening?
We're just sharing our name, our pronouns, and answering the question, who are the healers in your community and how do they create healing space?
Oh, Kevin Daniels, he, him, the healers in my community. I'm sitting in some of their barbershops right now. I'm sitting in some of their barbershops right now. Sometimes the healers are just regular, everyday people that tell you how I get a chance to do that when I'm out with the men's movement, and I get a chance to listen to people that we wouldn't even think represent healers, are healers, but they really are. I think we get so much more encouragement from them than we give it to them. So I would believe that those everyday people are the healers in the community.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Tracy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Kaiser. I am the Senior Vice President of Office of Resident Services for the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. Office of Resident Services serves lots of communities. So I will talk about the HABC community, particularly my division. And our healers are our staff that care. We create that space by actually taking the time to talk to our residents, to mostly listen, and then try to provide them with resources that can assist them and their families.
Thank you. Next, young elder.
Hi, everybody. My name is Young Elder. I'm 19 and I am a youth leader, a part of Heart Smiles, and a youth ambassador, a part of Healing Youth Alliance. My pronouns are she and hers. And I think the healers in my city would definitely have to be anybody in Heart Smiles or related to Heart Smiles, just because what Heart Smiles, it's not just one person. It's a whole community. It's a whole family. And together, like, the person who created Heart Smiles, which is Miss Joni, like she creates this environment that just makes it feel safe, makes it feel like I can be myself, I can express how I feel, and I can also get constructive criticism when it's needed. So just definitely just opening up that space for people to be vulnerable. So she's definitely a healer, and Heart Smiles are definitely healers in my city.
Thanks, Elder. All right, Zeke.
Great. Zeke, he, him, his, city council. And to me, I'm just going to say my wife, who is a phenomenal both psychiatrist, but also mother, wife, just one of the most kind and just very inspiring person in my life. So I'm just going to say my wife is the biggest healer in my life.
Thank you. And Monica.
Hi, everyone. Monica Guerrero Vasquez, she, her, hers. Healers in the community are people who hug people who hug and embrace the community. And the way that they create spaces are through allyship and advocacy. I love the passion with whom people work and advocate for those who are underrepresented, marginalized, and don't have a space in the table. So, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, we made it through ours with a minute and 30 seconds to spare before I bring everyone else back. But I heard a lot of themes of everyday people, that anyone can really be a healer, that people who are loving one another and reaching out. And I heard themes of like young people. And I wonder if those people know that they're healers, right? Like the people that we think of as healers, do they know that they play that role? Yeah, it's just something to think about. All right, I'm gonna send a quick note to folks to let them know they have another minute before we regroup.
I think that's a powerful thing. Do they really know that they are healers? Wow. And maybe that's our job, to awaken them to that fact.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't, we know things about people, but when we tell them what we think about them, it really empowers them to own that. Ebony, you're just joining. We're so glad to have you. Do you want to share, excuse me, do you want to share your name and pronouns and who you see as the healers in your community? Her audio may not be connected yet, so. All right, I'm going to bring everyone back. Zeke, I like that you looked up as if the people might come from above, is how I interpreted that. Like the people are coming.
They'll just sort of drop from
Right.
the ceiling somehow.
Yes.
And I want to say something before people start coming. It's I like how some of the people who spoke now define what community means for them. Like they specify what community they were talking about, and that's something that I think we need to do more and push more, because who's talking, who is who to define the community, right? Yeah, I really appreciated that.
All right, is everybody back?
Give them like 5 more seconds.
Shaquille.
One room just closed, so
Shaquille, can you hear me? Nope.
Now I can.
all right, we're all here now.
No.
All right. Welcome back, Trauma Informed Care Task Force family. So we have 3 folks on the Getting to Know You today. Each person gets 5 minutes to share about who they are. We're going to start today with Desiree Dixon.
All right, and let's see if I got this. I'm gonna try and share this screen. Okay, let me start this first. Oops, all right. I should have given you control, Ann. All right, let's try again. Okay, can you guys see it? Okay, awesome. Hi, I am Desiree, and I've coined myself Trauma Transformer. And my goal, you know, a lot of folks, including myself, used to always talk about all the trauma that we survived, but I wanted to take that a step further, right? How do we triumph in spite of the trauma that we have experienced? So that is my focus, to help individuals, couples and families as a therapist, turn their trauma into triumph, and also working with organizations to help them do the same, looking at ways that the individuals who make up that organization are showing up with their best selves, their full self, feeling comfortable and valued in those organizations to be able to be successful and help the organization be successful. So who am I? In essence, I am a first-generation Jamaican American. And again, my belief in turning trauma into triumph is focused on the dual power of resiliency and joy to improve both the lives of people and organization. As well as, along with being a therapist, I'm also a trainer, a coach, a consultant, and a speaker. And a lot of the focus of the work that I do is around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Can't forget that part. But a lot of it has to do with the work that I do around identity-based trauma. So a little bit of history. Trauma therapist, certified in EMDR and brain spotting. So those are the 2 main trauma protocols that I use with clients, that all the clinicians that work with me use with the clients. We provide counseling to many in the Baltimore community. In addition, training, speaking, doing some consulting, and as well as coaching, both individuals and organizations. I'm an expert in employee mental health, workplace trauma, as well as team building, and now working with some school around the trauma that they've experienced, school trauma, kids coming back to school post-COVID, but essentially trying to help folks heal from trauma. So a little bit about Desiree. So this is Desiree at 8 first, and I think that second one, they're both from Jamaica. I think this is Desiree from 11 or 12, right? So born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica until the age of 13. And by the time I was 18, I had a ACEs score of 8. And as an immigrant, there were only 2 jobs I was allowed to consider: lawyer, doctor, engineer. So I rejected all 3 of them and eventually found myself in the HR field. As a result of spending some time in HR, I developed a lot of community-based programs. And one of the programs that I I worked with was helping create a STEM program for a lot of high school kids here in Baltimore City with one of the organizations that I was working with. And I found myself more interested in spending time around that project than my actual job. So that's when I knew it was time for me to make a change. And then I shifted, went back to school to the University of Maryland, where I did my work in psychology and in social work. And then once I graduated, I did both clinical work, and I also worked as a researcher with the Ruth Young Center for Children and Families, along with Promise Heights. And in doing that work is when I started to see certain traumas would show up for people that didn't have traditional big T traumas. You know, they'd say, oh, you know, I was raised well, came from a great family, but I don't understand, you know, I'm not always happy. I always feel there's some self-image, self-esteem issues, imposter syndrome stuff happening. And from a lot of those conversations, both in research and in practice, is when I developed the identity-based trauma and created a framework for TBID and TBID2 to address this issue. And if anyone has questions, we could talk about it offline. Too much to get into in 5 minutes. So along with the work that I was doing in research, what I recognize is a lot of the work that we were being asked to do from a clinical standpoint, trying to help a lot of the families with their psychological needs. There was also a lot of unmet needs, as you guys are all aware, you know, here in Baltimore City, around feeling safe and secure, both literally and figuratively, as well as just having good places to eat, and I mean, to sleep and having food and warmth and that sort of thing. So as a result of that, I recognize that until I was able to help folks address their basic needs, we couldn't really address the psychological needs here. And so that created the birth of Atlas Urban Development. That's another company that I have. It's a real estate development company. I have someone who essentially runs that, so I can focus on the therapy business. But essentially, we partner with nonprofits to develop affordable housing for women and their families. And one of the projects that I'm excited about that I'm working on developing is a trauma center here in Baltimore. It'll be the nonprofit venture of Bolton Therapy. And my signature talk is masquerading as myself, how identity-based trauma shows up as imposter syndrome. This is a talk and a topic I love talking about. Lots of stuff. Folks really dive in and really share a lot, and they're able to get a tremendous amount out of it. And then some other things that I talk about essentially around trauma, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of conversations around business and entrepreneurship, particularly for women and minority-owned businesses, helping them be able to just live that best life through understanding all of the benefits of entrepreneurship. And some other things, my big series I love talking about is The Risers, with the power of reframing and identity and stillness, entrepreneurship, resiliency, and joy. And then this is just one of my graphics person threw in for me. She said, this is the impact that I've had over the years, tons of clients served over the 20 years. And some of the features and collaborations that I have done. And that's it. Any questions? I don't know how much time I have left, Anne. I tried. I really practiced. I tried. Any questions? All right. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree. Great to learn all that about you. All right. Up next, we have Jabari.
I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, everyone sees that all right? Okay, great. Hopefully the audio works. I just got some weird thing about audio, but who knows? I didn't do any fancy video. This is just a quick biographical, like, slideshow about like who I am. It's like super biographical. So like you get some baby pictures. I was born in Baltimore City. I was raised in Baltimore County in Pikesville with my mom and my dad. I'm the oldest of three. I have a little brother and a little sister. I was always super involved in school. Got really involved in like student government and musical theater and all that good stuff. I grew up in Pikesville. I went to Towson High School for the Law and Public Policy program, which was actually really cool because they had a courtroom like right in the school. I always say that my career in public service started when I was in third grade as student government classroom representative. I ran for that and won. And I did student government my entire life. Really big into school and theater, and I was the drum major, the marching band, and anyone who knows me, imagine what I was like in high school, and you were completely correct. That's absolutely who I was. I graduated high school and I did a year at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and I realized that I just was not ready for college at this time. I showed up, they gave me a room key and a card, and they said, swipe this when you want food. And I was like, this is a vacation. This is a resort. This is not college. And as a first generational student, I didn't have any guidance around financial aid. I had no idea what a bursar was. I was a math major, which was really strange, but I loved math. I only went to my math classes. I didn't go to anything else. And so I got kicked out of college my first year. After I graduated, I was like, well, or after I got kicked out rather, I was like, what am I going to do? I started volunteering with an organization called GLSEN when I was about 15. And at this time, it was called the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. So after my first year of college, I went back to GLSEN and I said, you know what, let's continue to do some good work there. GLSEN's mission is to make sure that schools are safe for LGBTQ students. I come from a family of teachers, so I always knew I wanted to work with young people and be a teacher, but I always knew I wanted to end up in public service in some way. So I started with GLSEN, became their lead facilitator and then their education manager. Through that work, this was like 2009, I was giving like lectures on LGBTQ issues in Baltimore City schools, which was a really challenging but really rewarding experience. Through that, I was able to land my first teaching gig in Baltimore City. And so I started teaching. I taught health, I taught math in elementary and middle school. And it was such a super awesome experience because I always wanted to be a teacher. And I have this really cute video. It's probably my favorite video from when I went to visit my students. I'll see if you can hear it, maybe not. All right, ready? Love my kids, and every time I see that video, it makes me smile because I was really able to make some really great connections there. After teaching, I started doing community leadership in nonprofits. I became the first executive director of GLSEN Maryland. I was executive director of Baltimore's LGBTQ Community Center. I worked for Free State and just continued my leadership in the community. And then, as the kids say, it just all snapped and I became everywhere on LGBTQ stuff. I started speaking nationally on the issue, some local press. One of my most proudest moments was passing policy JBB in city schools, which I really appreciated Zeke's support on and the rest of the city council, which made sure that trans students are not discriminated in schools. So I took all of that good work and I started at the mayor's office in 2018. This was my first day, and I joined as the LGBTQ affairs liaison. And over the next 3 years, I would collaborate with the mayor and city council and government to work on safety, unity, stability, health, and inclusion for Baltimore's LGBTQ communities. And to be in that role to start a conversation that had not been started before, a legacy of violence and discrimination against the community, and build a partnership was really, really awesome. So I really enjoyed that time. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to announce my next step. I'm going to be joining the team at Baltimore Safe Haven. They are Maryland's only trans-led direct services organization, following my passion to make sure that we work on gender and race-based violence. So I'll be joining as their COO and growing my own consulting work as Jabari Allows Consulting, where I add value to businesses, schools, and organizations doing LGBTQ inclusion. When I'm not doing that, I like to party and like to eat, and I like to watch Jeopardy, and I love Beyonce. So that's what I'm doing on my free time. To get in touch with me, that's my link tree. And thanks for listening. That's a little bit about me.
All right, all right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jabari. Always great. Next up, we've got Mr. Daniel Parsons, who is another one of our exceptional teachers.
Thanks. Wow, that's tough to follow, but you all are seeing my classroom, which I think is an important part of who I am. I'm glad that by an accident I had to bring my desktop computer in, so I can't actually Zoom from home anymore, which is kind of a blessing. But it's kind of forcing you to be able to see, to me, the best representation of myself, where my heart stays most of the time, where I've come to know trauma intimately. I've seen it face to face. This room has seen so much, both in terms of trauma and healing, that it's hard to even fit in 5 minutes, both from students, from amazing community leaders, from the programs that are held in this room. This really is the space where my work is done. This is my work. But I guess I'm gonna share my screen for a second and show you just a little bit, tell you a little bit about myself. This is my room pre-COVID. I've been a teacher in Baltimore City schools now for 9 years. This is my 9th year. I spent 1 year at a school that closed, and I spent 8 years here at Douglas. And I never want to teach anywhere else, to be honest with you. This has been an amazing school, and it is, I think, one of the most underrated schools in the city. And sometimes it feels like it's the most misunderstood school in the city. The students here are brilliant and awesome and amazing and so exceptionally traumatized. So one of the things that I realized right away when I worked here, I started at Douglas when we had a bunch of money, and that it was this amazing year where we had gone into turnaround status, and they had painted all the rooms and put up all these beautiful logos, handed out free uniforms to students, and it was such an amazing place to be. Students were happy to come to school. They were succeeding. Test scores were going up. And then our principal got arrested, taken away by the FBI. And I watched it all crash. Within a year, we had 2 principals the next year, and the uprising happened in our front yard. And I rode my bicycle right past the CVS as they were, our crowds were gathering outside. I saw people in the crowds that I knew, some, who were just watching. I watched my own students get blocked by the police as they were just trying to walk home that day. I watched a student pushing a baby stroller get tear gassed. I've seen so much real trauma that has surrounded this particular building, the building that I'm speaking to you from. It almost feels like there's something, again, like it's under attack, like it feels under attack. And yet it's been such a powerful place for healing in the city. And I like to think about the history of this place, of this building. And I'm inspired so often by so many of the alumni who get to come through and talk to the students and think about the way this building has been an epicenter, not just for healing, but for the struggle for justice, not even since 2015, but since the 70s, since the 40s, since the 30s, right? Even before we were in this building, we were in a previous building. This is such a powerful place just for me to be able to be a part of it. I count myself incredibly lucky. But the work that I do is surrounded, I think, a lot in my experiences growing up. I was a homeschool kid. My dad was in the military, moved around a lot, but I'm a cult survivor. I grew up in an extreme evangelical fringe cult that did not allow people in that cult to read, anything besides the Bible. And yet I found my escape through the public library. It was my way out. And that cult also, ended in 2011. And I find surviving that and having defined myself through the act of reading has given me my inspiration to talk to students and to reach out to students and bridge the gaps between us with literacy. And that's why it's been so important to me to be able to bring books into my space and have students be in this space. And this was where I was when a shooting occurred at our school that sort of shocked, as much as we'd seen up to this point, shocked almost all of us. We were in this room right here. We're in this room that you can see on the screen, that you can see behind me, locked down for almost an hour in this classroom, where all these bookshelves suddenly became barricades. And we pushed them up against the walls. Students hid behind them. We were gathering anything that you could throw to ready ourselves for what felt like an attack. We didn't know what was going on. And it was such an intense event that afterwards, before we even really knew what happened, we had been galvanized, completely galvanized, and the students wanted to do something about it. So I'm going to skip a little bit. I think the most important thing about the work that I do is that I get to provide a space for students to use their voices to reshape the city in ways that they believe will make it safer for people who have to survive it. And some of my proudest moments are seeing like the students you see, Jayana Santos, Jamani Thomas, and Brianna Harris, who Zeke invited to come speak in front of City Council, and they did so, and they were able to get involved with the legislation that eventually became the Healing the City Act. And one of the things that makes me proudest is that they really used the space of this classroom, not because of anything I did, but because of the way they were able to feel empowered in this space as sort of almost an underground a war room where they could practice their speeches, talk to each other, bounce ideas off of each other, and just learn to become the powerful individuals that they are. And, to me, it's an honor just every day I get to walk into this building, and I'm happy that I've been able to come back into the building and see students, because already, as difficult as it is teaching under these conditions, healing is beginning again, That's pretty much it.
Wow. So let me be explicitly clear that there would be no Healing City Act if it were not for Daniel Parson, Brianna, Jayana, and Damani. The way they came to City Hall after that shooting that Mr. Parsons described, just on a mission. And, I'll never forget that hearing. So much of the grown-up discourse had been, and some of you who are in education will remember, had been about, should we arm school police? Should SROs have guns while they're walking around? Could that have maybe prevented this? And what was so powerful and what seriously changed my mind, our council's mind, and got us on this path was hearing from Daniel's students say, no, that's not what we're interested in. That's the wrong conversation to be having. What we need to be focused on as a city is trauma, and not just the one-off horrific but really uncommon shooting that took place in that building, but the day-to-day lived experiences for us as young people in this city, whether it's with homelessness, having a family member that deals with substance addiction, or just being Black in a city that is one of the birthplaces of redlining, and racial housing segregation. And their testimony, it's worth watching, it's on YouTube, was just stirring and incredibly powerful, and really is what led us on this path. And they were there as well a year later back at Frederick Douglass High School, speaking on this bill where then Mayor Jack Young signed it. So would not be here without that work and without Daniel's leadership, and just ability to connect with young people. So I appreciate you. And I appreciate Jabari. Jabari also contributed. We did a bill not too long ago that made all the single stall restrooms in our city gender inclusive. We think about safety for our trans and non-binary community and the violent places that restrooms can sometimes be. And again, that was to me a really healing bill, and the first bill to be signed at a pride parade, and wouldn't happen without Jabari. And then just getting to know Desiree over these last couple of months and all the work that you've done is just, it's really, really, really meaningful to have you all in this task force. So I thank you for that. So want to turn it back now to Jabari, Freya, and Colby to talk some diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically to talk about belonging.
Jabari, do you want to kick us off?
Would love to. So thanks so much, everyone, for your great comments in the chat. And thank you to Faria and Colby, who took the lead on putting this together. The first couple of slides is really just repeating back to you what we've heard, so you understand that you were heard and that you see the direction that we're working towards. So these were all the agreements that we have decided on, some of the ones that were added last meeting. So this is, I'm not going to read them to you. They'll certainly be in the notes, but those are our agreements. Our next slide here. So those are the values that we covered. We also added some really important ones, the ones you see to the right. So the equity, the honesty, authenticity, outcomes, justice, integrity, radical imagination, which I just get kind of shivers every time I read that. That's really great. And trust. And so we've added those as guiding values for our body. And then potential topics, we had come up with those on the left, but at the last meeting, there was so many great additions to some of these topics. And so this is going to be our roadmap for the things that we prepare for you moving forward. And so I just want to take a minute for everyone to take a look at this. And this isn't your final chance. You can always email us and be like, hey, make sure we add that. But make sure that everything that you contributed last session was taken into account and is recorded here on this list.
Absolutely.
Not,
thank you, Jabari.
Yep, go ahead.
And just like Jabari said, this is really just a growing, ever evolving list. So if you ever have an agreement or a value that we need to add, if there's ever a topic that either comes up out of a conversation in subgroups or just with a larger group and you really want to raise it as a DEI topic, definitely email us. And I was looking at Desiree's slide deck. I was looking at just hearing all of your round the horn opening conversations. All of you really are the experts on facilitating these conversations and these topics. So please reach out to us if something really sticks with you and if you want to, help facilitate a DEI conversation on any one of these topics, and we can absolutely add you to the agenda. So this is just a recap of the last few sessions that, we've been working together and creating our overall agreements and values. Today, we want to dive a little bit deeper and really start operationalizing and thinking about what diversity means, what equity means, and what inclusion means. All of us have a different definition of DEI. I bet if I asked Jabari to write down his definition, if I asked Colby to write down their definition and I wrote one, all three of ours would be completely different because all of us have different representations and identities that have brought us to this work. So we wanted to create an overarching framework for what DEI is and, create a roadmap for where we're headed as a trauma Informed Care Task Force. So here's a Venn diagram. The blue circle is diversity. Of course, we all have a feeling about what diversity means. It's the presence of difference, and it's making sure that all of our differences, all of our representations, all of our identities across race, across class, across sex and gender orientation, across religion, ethnicity, national origin, mental or physical disabilities, life experience. As a trauma-informed care task force, we of course want to make sure that we, have included a diverse group of people who are coming up with decisions, not just in whole group, but even in some of the smaller committees when we start working in those. We always want to be thinking who's here, who's in the room, and who's not. The second term that we just want to introduce to all of you is equity. And this is, of course, constantly and consistently recognizing and redistributing power. And lastly, inclusion, which is the thoughts, ideas, and perspectives of all individuals. The one point that I really want to make about inclusion is it's how that person, how that individual, how much they felt like they were included. So it's not whether I thought that Zeke felt included, it's how included did Zeke feel on his own. So when we start thinking about DEI spaces, the goal is really to make sure that all three of these are working together. I'm going to share a few stories, a few dangers of what happens if we only include two and leave out the third. So for example, if we have equity and inclusion, but we never took the time to incorporate diversity, we're actually left with an oversaturation of very similar, very homogeneous viewpoints. And really our viewpoint of the situation is really simplified. We're not capturing the diverse perspectives of everybody. So what this looks like in spaces is like boards of organizations that just have a lot of white guys, right? All of us know these boards. We see it all over. And that's the danger of, having equity and inclusion, but no diversity. The second danger that might come up is when we have inclusion and diversity, but we don't actually have equity. We never actually thought to constantly and consistently recognize and redistribute power. And what that leads to is a power struggle. And I can give you one example. So in the 2018-2019 Women's March, everybody was like, yeah, Women's March, Black Lives Matter, let's get women of color to help organize the march. Well, they asked women of color, they asked them to get on board and help be part of the planning committee for the Women's March, but they never provided an opportunity for the women of color to hold leadership positions. What? You just wanted a whole bunch of token women of color to come in and do the work, but you didn't give them any leadership roles? Nuh-uh, we're not doing that in this space. We're gonna make sure that we have all three of these. So really the women of color said, no, that's wrong. We demand leadership. We demand to be recognized. We demand, to have power. And so thankfully they were able to get some. And the last story that I want to give you is what happens when we have equity and diversity, but we don't have inclusion. And this is the most subtle, and it's really the most tricky. This is the one that comes up the most in meeting spaces. And this is what it sounds like. It sounds like, I hear you, but, and then, you go in and insert your comment and completely reject what the other person said. Or if I could just play devil's advocate, you all hear that in spaces? I do. Or I have a friend who is X and they said Y, and, using your one friend as an example, as if your one friend's intersectionality it just speaks for everybody rather than it being, just their one perspective. So it's basically this active and sometimes very subtle way of erasing a person's perspective or experience. I'm not saying that any of us are going to do that. I think a lot of us are DEI experts in this space. I'm just sharing some common dangers that happen. So, and it also looks like, when you're invited to a boardroom to speak for every single person that looks like you. Oftentimes people call me into spaces and they want me to speak for all the immigrants, all the Muslims, all the Pakistanis, all the females, like all the people who are first generation college goers. That's a lot. I'm an intersectional person. And all of those identities are not monolithic experiences. So we have to take a step back and remember to use I statements and not speak on behalf of all of the identities we represent. And lastly, those are the dangers, right? But there's so many beautiful things that also come out of DEI work. When we really take the time to center diversity and have equity and have inclusion on top of that, what it leads to is a place where people feel like they belong. People feel like their full potentials, their individuality is being honored and affirmed. And when people feel like they belong, that's really when people thrive. That's when we have, trust between people to innovate and share back and forth ideas. It's where we all truly believe that, our views are important, we are important, we matter, and it's okay to speak up and say things even when we feel uncomfortable about it. So, Jabari's and Colby's and my goal for this DEI space is really to be intentional at keeping us in the center of all three of these and helping pull the group back when we start swaying too much to one side and where we might be isolating in one space and not fully being at the intersectionality of all three of these. So let's work to do that. Let's work to create a space where all of us belong. In order to close our DEI conversation for today, we want to throw a question to the group. And I'm going to let Colby come on mic and help us facilitate this conversation.
And see if that helps. I get a thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so thinking about belonging, the first step is that we need to know what belonging feels like and what is our sense of belonging. So it would
Colby, we can't hear you. Like we can hear you're talking, but we can't, it's not coming through.
Colby, do you want me to just facilitate this? I know that you're in a car and this signal might be a little weak right now. Okay, so our question is, what fosters your sense of belonging? So what is it going to take for you to show up as an individual to feel like you matter, your voice and your identity and your perspective matters, and this space is diverse and inclusive and equitable? Who is it going to take, what, where, and when? And I can go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can have more of a sense of community as we're talking about what fosters each of our sense of belonging.
Are we unmuting ourselves and just talking out loud right now?
Yeah, thanks for the clarity. We have about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, so I'm just hoping to hear from a few people. You can unmute yourself, you can put an answer in the chat box, whatever works for you.
So I'll say really quickly that for me, something that helps me have a sense of belonging is when people are not just honest with me, but also transparent. So like if you tell me you're going to the store, that's honest. But if you tell me you're going to the store to buy liquor and blunt paper, that's transparent, right? You're actually telling me about your intentions and what's going on. And so I think a lot of times when we disagree with one another or when we have conflict, people stop being transparent. And they do slide into those, well, to play devil's advocate or things like that. And they start using we pronouns when they're really talking about themselves. And so like for me, I feel safest when there are people who are honest about disagreeing with me and how they disagree and why they disagree. And we're able to have that conversation without anybody feeling attacked, because we know that transparency is the place that we're functioning from. So yeah, that's me.
I love that. Thank you. Honesty. Delegate Boyce.
Hi, and for the purposes of this structure, I'd like to be called Regina, because I think I'm Regina first, and delegate is a title that comes and go, but I don't come and go. So I'd appreciate Regina. So to Erica's point, I think for me, belonging means, one, I have to have a relationship with someone enough to know a person, and for them to know me, to end up, quote unquote, fostering belonging, right? Or accepting people as they are, but you don't know who they are if you don't get to know them. And I think a lot of our issues sometimes stem from the fact that we really don't get to know people, either people we are afraid to get to know, or people we, in the past haven't come in contact. I came from a place that I didn't see, quote unquote, Black people. I've never met someone who was Muslim. And it's like, rather than being like, oh, like, I want a Muslim friend, it's like, well, who is this person sharing the same space with me? I like to know who they are and what they like or what they don't like. We don't really take the time to get to know people. So in order to kind of foster belonging, I have to know who I am, who you are, but who we are together. In a space to then know that, like, I know this person and I know what they like and they don't like, and I know kind of why. And for those, for instance, like myself, I like boundaries. And so, a sense of belonging for me is also feeling safe, and feeling that I can trust individuals around me enough to open up a little more. And then, but what am I doing in the same way for someone else? So I think it's really getting to know people, really having relationship with other folks in order to be able to kind of foster belonging for all of us.
Absolutely, Regina. Thank you. I love that. It seems like safety, relationships, trust, just building a relationship where we feel safe. I'm going to ask one more person. And I love what Colby brought up, this feeling that, trauma, our sense of belonging, all of these are not only like mental manifestations, but they're physical manifestations too. So for Colby, they really feel it. It's the ease in their exhales, and it's having a soft belly. I love that. For me, I really feel like I belong when my anxiety is decreased. I'm somebody who's really anxious. I'm a teacher, but like every single time I'm speaking, I get so anxious. And I feel like I belong in this space because I haven't had an anxiety attack and had to like take down my presentation and ask somebody to take over. So just thank you so much for creating a space where we all belong and a space where we're really pushing for diversity, equity, and inclusion for everyone. Thank you. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you, Fariha, Jabari, and Colby. Zeke, I'm actually going to pass it. I don't know, Zeke, if you want it or if you want me to pass it on to our presenters for the night.
So just real quick, let me just say thank you to Jabari, Colby, Fariha. That was really great, and loved the way you were able to break down the diversity, equity, and inclusion into belonging. Just really thoughtful and clear, and the stories made total sense. So thank you for that. And do also have to recognize Regina, who just ended session, for her great work fighting for Baltimore, particularly on the environment, floor leading a number of bills. So I want to just give her some love and props as well. And with that, as we think about some teachings for tonight, we're going to start with Rachel from the health department to talk about urban ACEs and what does adverse childhood experiences look like in the urban context, a study that came out of Philadelphia. And then we are going to hear from Nika to speak specifically about the trauma of housing insecurity and what that looks like in her work. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Okay, let's see. Can you all see my screen? Great. Okay, so this is just a really short intro to, let's see if I can hide this, really short intro to the expanded ACEs, also known as urban ACEs. And last month we had Dr. Mendelson do an excellent job on just giving us an intro to the original ACEs. I always tell people that you can spend days learning about the ACEs and the impact it has. So for this evening, we're just going to go into what are urban ACEs or what are expanded ACEs. Okay. So we know that the original ACEs study had over 17,000 respondents. It was originally done in La Jolla, California by CDC and Kaiser Permanente for a joint venture. And this is just a timeline. I'm not expecting you all to read it because it's honestly for my own reference, but it started in 1980 for the study as a weight loss clinic and then morphed into, this public health study. It took 25 years for them to get it right. So when we're looking at the ACEs and we're seeing all of this great information, please know that it did not happen overnight. It took them 25 years to get it right. And then it was released in roughly 95 for the initial survey. And then 97 was where it really started to catch some stride through Kaiser Permanente. But what ended up happening was that the study was so impactful that it started to be adopted by other public health agencies, and physicians started championing the work of it. One of the physicians who really saw the impact is Dr. Nadine Burke. If you all have the opportunity, listen to her TED Talk, where she talks about why she uses the ACEs with every patient she sees and how it has reduced the number of stressors for the children who are coming into her practice, and then how she's also gotten her colleagues to understand the reason that the ACEs are so important and why the series of questions are so important. But let's go into the affective trauma and the urban / expanded ACEs.
In the mid-90s, Doctors Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda published groundbreaking research assessing the links between childhood adversity and adult health and well-being. In the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study, known as the ACE study, 17,000 mostly white, mostly middle-class adults were asked about 10 different types of childhood adversity. When you were a child, were you physically or psychologically abused by parents? Did you live with someone who abused drugs? Were you neglected? Was there domestic violence? Did anyone go to prison? Was someone in your home mentally ill? Respondents were assigned one ACE for each of the 10 types of adversity experienced. Surprisingly, more than 1 in 5 of this mostly middle-class population reported 3 or more ACEs. But even more eye-opening was the correlation between childhood adversity and adult mental and physical health.
The higher the ACE score, the more likely people were to suffer from things like heart disease, liver disease, lung disease, depression, suicide, IV drug abuse, and alcoholism. What it said was, we've got a common causality for all of our major health and social problems. And it was all related to what had happened to them as children.
But researchers like Dr. Roy Wade could see the ACE study didn't take into account economic distress, let alone hunger, housing insecurity, and other hardships in low-income neighborhoods.
When I came to Philadelphia and I saw the huge amount of blight, the community violence, the episodes of racism and discrimination, those are stressors too.
When Philadelphia researchers expanded the ACE survey to add questions about racism, neighborhood safety, and violence outside the home, they discovered that while 14% of the general population reported 4 or more ACEs, in Philadelphia, that number was a startling 37%.
Poverty is an adverse childhood experience that gets under the skin. Living in economic distress can actually translate into long-term negative health outcomes even for the most resilient individuals.
Okay. So let's take a look at this quick snapshot comparing the original ACEs to the expanded ACEs. So with the original ACEs, which was 17,000 respondents in La Jolla, California, roughly, through Kaiser Permanente, which is a private insurance company, the mean age was 56, whereas in Philadelphia, the mean age was 34. We know that the original ACEs study had majority white respondents, 79% as a matter of fact, whereas the Philadelphia study was more shaped like America, right? Because it's half Black, half white with a larger Hispanic population in there as well. They also have additionally high school graduation rate of the original ACE study at 94% compared to Philadelphia with 81%. Now you look down here at the percent below federal poverty line. Original ACEs study, there was no federal poverty line because no one in that original ACEs study qualified for a federal poverty line. Whereas in Philadelphia, it was 27%. So why expanded ACEs? Well, we know that there are so many things that affect and impact Black and Brown communities, as well as people who are in urban settings and are of low income. We know that discrimination and economic hardship play a part in what your ACEs score are. And we also know that there is a life cycle of ACEs. Once you have ACEs as a child, they don't automatically end when you turn 18. They continue, it's a cycle. So again, why expanded ACEs? It limited the survey design that was administered to adults reflecting back on their childhood. The urban/expanded ACEs is designed to ask children through the use of a therapist, medical professional, mental health professional about what they're experiencing now, with interventions in place, should there be disclosure. So I'm going to have you all just take a look at this. I'm not going to read off all of the ACEs questions. The expanded ACEs questions incorporate some of the questions from the original ACEs and then adds a few more. So now let's look at the next page for the expanded ACEs question. Now I highlighted some in purple that really help to show the difference of expanded versus original. So you see, do you feel safe in your neighborhood, which is number 18. And then the last one, which is so important, were you ever in foster care? Why is that important? Well, we know that Black and Brown youth are over policed, they are over court mandated, and they are the largest population in urban settings in foster care and group homes. Again, with the expanded ACEs, as with the original ACEs, you put a 1 next to each one of them that you have experienced in your lifetime. So let's look at the purpose of the expanded ACEs. Again, the purpose is when you identify youth who have experienced certain ACEs numbers, we can start the interventions. Just because trauma has had an impact on your life doesn't mean that it's forever there. There are things that can be done to mitigate that, right? So let's look at, actually, let's take a look at this. Interrupting the impact of ACEs. What can be done? We know that home visiting programs for pregnant women and their families skyrocket the amount of bonding between mother and child. It also helps to make sure that that family has all of the things that they need, the protective factors in place so that that child can grow up healthy. We also know that programs like intimate partner violence prevention programs, House of Ruth has a fabulous one, also help to interrupt the violence that happens in the home. Also providing funding to families that have unstable funding does a world of difference. And then quality childcare, okay? I did want to take a really quick look at this, which is Charm City ACEs, which shows the impact of ACEs on youth in Baltimore City. You can take a look at this at the data brief on ACEs among children. I can link that a little bit later. How does this impact our work? Let's take a look. One of the areas that we have worked with in Baltimore City Health Department as far as expanded ACEs is with our, is with our child fatality review. It's an action-oriented collaborative process. What we do is we take a look at the child deaths in Baltimore City and figure out, could they have been prevented? One of the ways that we do that is that we look at how urban ACEs has impacted children and youth and what interventions could have been put in place. One of the really great outcomes of it has been the Baltimore Links program, which works directly with youth who have experienced the death of a sibling and providing holistic case management for them. That program specifically is out of LifeBridge Health, but it came out of our work through CFR. Please let me know if you have any questions. I tried to speed through that. I hope it was okay.
Yes, Rachel, amazing. We have probably 2 minutes if people do have questions. I see some people saying they want more in-depth training on this and access to the report.
Oh, thank you. It's really, the information that comes from ACEs, like I said, it will take days to kind of dissect the information, but it's so fascinating once you start to peel that onion and learn how many ways ACEs impacts our lives. And I wanted to also thank Desiree Dixon for sharing her ACEs score, right? Because it shows that your ACEs are not you. You know, you may have a high ACE score, but it doesn't end there. There are interventions that can be put into place. If you know better, you do better. So yeah, let me know if you have questions, you all.
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing. I wanted to add one of the things along with foster care that we should keep in mind is also kinship care, right? There are a lot of kids that are mistreated or disrespected just in our system. And it's so traumatic for them because they're not being raised by their birth parents. So they're treated as less than or less valued because they're not being raised by mom or dad, which is similar treatment that a lot of the kids in foster care feel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Elder, did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question, but I did have a comment. I wanted to say I really, really liked your presentation. I know when I first had found out about ACEs, it was so interesting to me. So, to hear you dig deeper in that was really nice to hear. And I also wanted to say, like you said, if you know better, you can do better. So that's why it's so important that we, teach the youth, because I'm young. So if I'm able to understand it, then my peers, if they can understand, their ACEs, then they can maybe address them before they actually become health issues, So I really do appreciate your presentation. You did really good.
Thank you, Elder.
All right. For sake of time, we're going to shift to Mika.
All right, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can you all see my screen? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay.
Yep, we can.
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Cool. So I want to kind of center this idea of blight as an ACEs because it impacts your ability or a person's ability to access quality everything: food, housing, healthcare, education, employment, transportation. All of these things are impacted by blight. And in this context, I want to kind of really focus on, or I want you to keep in your mind ACEs question, or the expanded ACEs question number 18, which is, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Or how might someone who live in a blighted neighborhood feel safe or not feel safe in where they live? And so when we're talking about blight, and this does weave into housing insecurity, because where you have blight, you have housing insecurity. Housing insecurity is a symptom of blight. So when we're talking about blight, we're talking about the presence in, especially in concentrations of vacant, abandoned, dilapidated, underutilized, and misutilized properties in community. I think the first three are self-explanatory, but the last two, I'll give you examples of, because it'll help you center what you how you perceive blight. If you when we're talking about underutilized properties, we could think about the number of Baltimore City school buildings that have been closed and are now on the surplus sale list because of dwindling populations. So these are buildings that could be used for healthcare. They could be used for vertical farming. They could be used, obviously, for their original intended purpose, education. They could be used for recreation. They could be used for living, but many of them are not being used at all, or are being used in with student population as a school, but with student populations much smaller than they were designed. And then the second one is misutilized. So if you look at Pennsylvania Avenue from Martin Luther King Junior Boulevard to North Avenue, though this area has no full service grocery store, there are no less than 5 liquor stores. That is a misutilization of property, and it is blight because the properties are not serving the highest and best need, or a serious need for folks in community. And so oftentimes, folks will ask, well, just how did this happen? How did Baltimore become so blighted in particular areas, especially just given the number of, or the rich storied history of Black folks in Baltimore? And it simply has to do with how economics happened in Baltimore. Baltimore has always, even in the period of enslavement, had a large population of free Blacks living alongside of our enslaved kinfolk. And so that created a lot of animus and hesitancy and from all other groups, people we now know as white, who weren't in that period known as such, right? And so that animus economically shows up in things like the Maryland Occupation Act, which in the 1800s stated that Black folks who were free could not own, or Black folks in general could not own a cart or a dray, right? And this is how people typically sold their wares in the day. So you start to see these kind of economic issues, because at this time, Black folks lived kind of side by side with white folks, right? One block might be Black folks, one block might be white folks, or it was ethnic enclaves. Polish folks, Slavic folks, Jewish folks kind of lived all together. But then that pressure, that economic pressure, that economic animus, you see kind of develop into Ordinance 610 in the 1900s, which was the first housing segregation ordinance in all of the United States. So at that point, you start to see the development of blighted neighborhoods, in that Black folks were segregated to particular neighborhoods, and then the investment in those particular neighborhoods, or the treatment in those particular neighborhoods, was different than in other neighborhoods in the city. So these maps, I do a lot with maps because I think the visuals help. The first map kind of showed you the development of Baltimore's borders, but these maps both of these maps are from the period of the 1950s. The one on the left shows you concentrations of blight in Baltimore, right? And then the one on the right is the federal home loan map, otherwise known as redlining maps. And you can already see the red area on the redlining map is where the predominantly Black population in the city in the 1950s were. And then if you look at what is blighted, you can still see it's those same neighborhoods. And it's really telling what kind of investment, what kind of owner upkeep was happening in the city at those times. The legacy of all of the slum clearance, neighborhood renewal that you see that was supposed to make these neighborhoods better didn't actually make the neighborhoods better. In fact, it just expanded the blight as the community grew, right? So as you see white flight, as you have post-industrial downturn in terms of jobs on the port, you see that investment in neighborhoods that are becoming increasingly Black continues to be low, or it decreases. The city services decrease. And the legacy of that is neighborhoods where you have high instances of lead poisoning, which is what the map on the left shows you, or neighborhoods where you have lack of access to healthy or nutrient-dense food, which is what you see in the Baltimore food map on the right. In its present context, given COVID-19, this map kind of shows us COVID-19 cases overlaid over top of neighborhoods that have high levels of housing insecurity. So when you think about these things, these, again, if you look at the maps, these are the same areas, the same beginning of the black butterfly in the 1950s, the same distribution of negative impacts in terms of lead poisoning and food access. These are the same neighborhoods with high instances of housing insecurity and thus high instances of COVID-19 cases. Because of course, if you are housing insecure, you're not able to properly social distance, right? It makes it difficult to properly social distance. And these maps are, of course, the maps that show where the tax liens are. These are actually 2021. These are certificates that would go to sale if the sale happens this year. And again, if you look at the maps, you see the same wings of the butterfly. And this is really about like how the butterfly was created, how the butterfly got so many holes or so much damage to its wings. And it all goes back to like the economics of it. Where's the investment happening in the city? Where are city services, which is an investment indirectly like of tax revenues, where those things are being applied. And if you take a look at any of the maps from like Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, you'll see the same butterfly wings where you have, whether it's unemployment, whether it is small business startups, all of those kind of things seem to have negative numbers in the Black community. So when you if you think about the impact of blight, it impacts us physically, emotionally, socially, and economic, right? Everything from, if you look at the life expectancy in Sandtown, Winchester, it's a full 20 years less than it is in Roland Park. We're not even talking about a 10-mile distance. We're talking about inside the same city, walking distance really, or biking distance or scooter distance from each other to have such a large swing. Well, what's the difference in those neighborhoods? Yes, the populations are typically folks of different colors, folks of different economic classes, but also you won't find a vacant house in Roland Park. You certainly won't find one. If you find one that's vacant, you certainly won't find one with a tree growing up inside of it, right? There's the loss of equity. If you live next to a blighted property or vacant property, you lose something like $70,000 worth of equity. The number of properties that have become vacant or blighted because of the economic conditions in Baltimore, because of the lack of city services, you can see is up upwards of 100,000 properties. So, because remember, we're talking about not just vacant properties, but properties that are in poor condition, properties that are misutilized and things of that nature. And it does impact city revenues. So, I mentioned that I wanted us to kind of think about, do you feel safe in your neighborhood, right? When you're dealing with vacant property, when you're dealing with blighted properties. And so these two perspectives really jump out at me. One is from Dr. Coco that says, if a child has to walk past 29 vacant properties on their way to school, they've already failed the first grade. Not because it's anything innately wrong with the child, but that the conditions, right, the experiences that the child may have in trying to get an education create barriers that sometimes just aren't insurmountable without other help, without healing, right? Or from Ms. Muhammad at Full Blast Steam is that, I'm from Baltimore, where fun turns into felonies quick. Because again, if you look at broken windows policing, if you look at the broken windows study, it actually said that homeowners, property owners should be required to keep their properties in good condition, because people treat things better when the physical structures are in good condition. So instead of over policing, right, which happens in these in blighted communities, what you really needed was to hold the owners accountable. And so then you don't have this hyper policing that turns being a child and doing playing in the street into a crime, right? So your fun doesn't turn into felonies. The outcome simply is blight. It destroys life. It destroys community continuity. What is it like when you live on a block and there's nobody else but you? Well, 40 years ago, the block was vibrant and rich and had a store and had a doctor and had a trash man and had all of the different kinds of people and just had the vibe, people sitting on the stoop. What does that do? It destroys the physical enjoyment of the property, but it also can cause chronic stress, physical stress. There was a study out of, I think it was Philadelphia. If you viewing vacant lots raises a person's heart rate by 7 beats a minute, the study showed. That's a sign of chronic physical stress. And when you add that to not having access to food, clean food, and lead poisoning, it literally destroys life. And there's Dr. Full talks about this root shock of what happens when people are displaced from community because their home is condemned, right? Because of the vacants next to it, or because they haven't been able to keep it in good condition because they can't get access to equity because of the other blighted properties. It obviously damages wealth creation and generational wealth transfer, which again damages the future outcomes of communities. Because if you can't transition the house from yourself to your children, where do your children grow if they don't get to take the benefit of their house or the connection? It's something really powerful about being able to have dinner in the house that's been in your family for 100 years, right? And being able to connect to the history and to the folks that lived in that house that you were related to. And then it erodes property rights and responsibilities, which creates a continual cycle of blight in community. These are policies, right? This was not created in a vacuum. It didn't happen on its own. Blight is not organic. There were things that happen, practices that happen, and these are some of them. But more importantly, we always want to talk about what the solutions are, right? My mother always said, don't bring me no problem without a solution. And so there's really a lot of work being done in community, whether it's by Black Yield or the Black Church Food Security Network or the Living Well Center for Social and Economic Vibrancy or BRIOXI or Black Women Build. There's a lot of work being done to bring about neighborhood reparations. And the center of the platform, really the center of the solutions, would be a Baltimore Neighborhood Reparations Fund and Social Equity Bond. But that would support things like co-housing and co-ops, right? It would support ground rent redemption grants. It would support, developing community land controls and much more. Like, these aren't all the answers, but the answers are already in community. There are people already doing the work, and folks just need to kind of plug into those practices, support those practices, make sure things are getting the proper investment and care and feeding. I tried to give y'all like 200 years of history in 15 minutes. I don't exactly know how I did, but I'm happy to entertain questions if there's time, if there's time left.
I just, if I can, wanted to just say thank you to Nika for all the work that you're doing. This, we don't, and I'm thankful for this venue to talk about this, because often we're not talking about housing in terms of trauma, in terms of housing, but to me, it's one of the pieces of trying to be able to stabilize ourselves, in addition to our communities. So really grateful for Nika for doing all this extremely amazing work, and love the policies that, we could possibly go. And the fact that a lot of them are getting started at the grassroots level, and that we've done some of them already too. So really, thank you.
And so I just want to, since there aren't any questions, I just want to kind of give a note about just how traumatic some of the policies are. And specifically because it's tax sale season, I'm going to talk about tax sale. So we have, at this point, the SOS Fund, which is a program of Fight Blight Be More, has 17 clients. About a quarter of them are in 21215. A neighborhood, a series of neighborhood zip codes that has a problem with blight. And as my one of our co-creators is calling to let folks know that their tax debt is going to be paid below the $750 threshold, so they are not put on tax sale, or not sent to tax sale. These are elders, mostly elderly Black women, who are weeping. And I had to tell him, I can't make these calls because it is a trigger for me, and nobody wants me at City Hall chained to the door, because I will do it if I had to listen to these calls. But what people are expressing to him in the fear of losing their house, one of the clients said, I haven't slept since I got that final bill in legal notice. That was in February. Imagine not being able to sleep for now 6 weeks, trying to figure out how to save a home, your only home that you ever lived in your entire life. This is the trauma of policies like the tax sale. And this is why we have to be about this work.
That is beautifully put. And thank you for that story at the end. And thank you for this fantastic presentation, both Nika and Rachel. And to me, the through line is whether we're talking about urban ACEs or trauma or blight, that it didn't just get here by accident, but by a series of policy and political choices and economic choices that we've made in how we've governed and organized resources, and that the only way out is to reverse those policies. And whether that's neighborhood reparations, whether it's any of the organizations and groups that Nika lifted up, but that is the work forward, and that all of this that we see within our city, that there is a deep, long historical context that got us here. So again, thank you so much to both of you. I feel like these were both powerful and just extremely well-constructed presentations, and really helpful for helping us all understand this different vocabulary that we're now learning together. All right, so we are at time. We're 4 minutes over. Apologies. Who, as we close out, who would like to be 3 people to present on themselves in the next go round?
I can go.
Great. Lindsay? Seeing Brendan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to as well. Thanks.
Great. And one more. Come on, one more person. I want to go eat dinner. I got to feed my kids. I'm gonna give this 10 more seconds. Come on, somebody.
Hey, I'll do it.
That's what I'm talking about, Tamar. Fantastic. Thank you for not leaving me hanging. All right. Amazing. So we got our 3 folks. for next week. Thank you for everyone for being here this week. Next week, we are going to start talking about the subcommittees for this task force and opening up some conversation about that and how we drive the work forward. But again, thank you to everybody who spoke, presented, listened, and was present tonight. It's great being with y'all.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? Is the next meeting on the 29th or the 6th? For some reason, I have it on the 6th on my schedule, but that's 3 weeks from now. Is there like a off week?
Yeah, it's the first and third Thursday of the month.
First and third.
Actually,
Okay. Thinking every other. Okay.
No, it's the first and third.
First and third. Okay, thank you.
So which date is that, Ann?
It's May 6th.
Awesome. All right. See y'all.